My grandfather spent 40 years restoring a single car. Every Saturday morning for as long as I can remember, he was out in that garage with his sleeves rolled up and grease under his fingernails, sanding a panel, tuning the engine, hand-stitching the leather seats one stitch at a time. A 1966 Ford Mustang, candy apple red with a burgundy undertone. He mixed himself because factory red wasn't deep enough for a man who believed that anything worth doing was worth doing slowly. That car was his cathedral, his love letter to my grandmother, his 40-year promise kept one bolt at a time. When I walked into the garage that Monday morning 6 months after we buried him, the car was gone. Just gone. An oil stain on concrete and an empty space where 4 decades of patients used to live. My sister Vanessa told me she sold it, $28,000. Her fiancé Mark needed the money for a wedding deposit in Dubai. She said it like she was telling me she'd returned a sweater. But the next morning, the man who bought the car called me and said 7 words that changed everything. Your grandfather hid something inside it. I need to back up. My name is Chloe Ramirez. I'm 34 years old and I work the night shift in the ICU at Phoenix General Hospital. I've held the hands of strangers while machines decided whether they lived or died. I've delivered news that ended marriages and started grief that would last decades. I've been cursed at, grabbed, spit on, and thanked with flowers by people who don't remember doing any of those things. None of that prepared me for what I found in that garage. Or rather, what I didn't find. 6 months earlier, we buried Arthur Ramirez, my grandfather. The man who raised me and Vanessa after our parents' divorce scattered the family like shrapnel. Mom moved to Portland. Dad moved to a bar stool. Arthur moved us into his house in the same quiet Phoenix neighborhood where he'd lived for 37 years, put us in the bedroom that used to be his office, and never once made us feel like we were anything other than home. He was a forensic accountant, 40 years of reading numbers the way surgeons read x-rays, tracing money through corporations and shell companies and fraudulent balance sheets. He testified in federal court 11 times. He wore the same gray suit every time because he said juries trust a man who doesn't try to impress them. He was the most patient human being I have ever known. He built things slowly. He believed that was the only way to build things that lasted. The house was his. He left it to both of us, Vanessa and me, equal shares. Vanessa had moved into an apartment in Scottsdale with Mark about a year before Arthur died, but I stayed. The house smelled like Arthur. Folgers coffee and Old Spice and the faint sweetness of pipe tobacco he quit smoking 15 years ago, but never quite washed out of the curtains. I couldn't leave that smell. I worked my 12-hour night shifts at the hospital and came home to Arthur's kitchen and drank coffee from his Diamondback's mug and pretended the silence was just him sleeping in the next room. That Monday morning I pulled into the driveway at 6:47 after a brutal shift. 2 codes, 1 we saved, 1 we didn't. My scrubs smelled like hospital soap and adrenaline, and the particular exhaustion that lives in your bones after you've watched a monitor go flat and known there was nothing left to do but call it. I walked through the kitchen, set my bag on the counter, poured water, and looked through the window toward the garage. The side door was open. I always closed it. Arthur taught me that. Close the garage, kiddo. The desert gets in everything. I walked across the yard, pushed the door wider, and stepped into the emptiest room I have ever stood in. The Mustang was gone. I stood there for a full minute doing what I do when a patient's vitals shift and nobody else has noticed yet. I held still. I breathed. I looked at everything. The oil stain on the concrete floor, dark and wide, shaped like a heart split down the middle. The workbench along the back wall with Arthur's tools still hanging on shadow boards, socket wrenches arranged by size, the air compressor he rebuilt himself crouching in the corner like a tired dog. The smell was still there, motor oil and old leather and the dry mineral scent of Arizona dust. But the center of the room, the space where the Mustang had lived for 40 years, was empty. Just air and absence where something beautiful used to be. I touched the workbench, ran my fingers across the surface the way you touch a hospital bed after the patient is gone, and the sheets have been stripped, and there's nothing left but the shape of where someone used to lie. Arthur's restoration journal sat open near the vise. A thick spiral notebook, pages yellowed, every entry dated in his precise accountant's handwriting. Parts ordered, paint codes, torque specifications, mileage logs, 40 years of Saturdays documented in blue ballpoint ink. I picked it up, flipped to the last entry, dated 7 weeks before his stroke. Chloe's birthday next month. Surprise her. She's ready. 40 years, and this old car still teaches me patience. Can't wait to see her face when she turns the key and hears that engine for the first time, knowing it's hers. My girl. She'll understand what this car really... It stopped mid-sentence. The pen trailed off the edge of the word, a thin blue line running into nothing. 3 weeks later, Arthur collapsed at his desk. Massive stroke. I held his hand in the ICU for 11 hours. I knew the rhythm of those monitors better than anyone in the building. I heard the change before the alarms triggered. I was the first person in the room to know he was gone, and I was the last person to let go of his hand. A dried flower fell from between the journal pages when I turned them. Small, purple, pressed flat by the weight of months. Lavender. I held it in my palm. Arthur grew lavender in the backyard. Had for decades. Dried it on the kitchen windowsill, sewed it into little cloth bags with clumsy stitches that made me laugh every time. He hung them in the Mustang. Said it kept the leather from cracking. But I knew the truth. Lavender was my grandmother Clara's favorite. She died when I was 4. Arthur kept the lavender alive for 40 years after, the same way he kept the car alive, the same way he kept us alive. Some men grieve with silence. Arthur grieved with maintenance. I set the flower back in the journal, then I noticed the floor. Fresh tire marks. Not the Mustang's tires, which I knew by tread the way I knew Arthur's handwriting. These were wider, heavier, trailer tires. Someone had backed a flatbed into this garage, loaded a 2,000-pound classic car and hauled it away. You don't need a flatbed to drive a car 3 miles to a mechanic's shop. The Mustang ran fine. Arthur had it tuned and running 2 months before he died. I remember the sound, the deep 440 Magnum rumble that shook the garage walls and made the wrenches rattle on their hooks. That engine didn't need a flatbed. Someone chose to use one. Someone planned this. I called Vanessa. 3 times. Each call went to voicemail. Her voice, bright and rehearsed, telling me to leave a message and she'd get back to me. I didn't leave a message. Some things you don't say to a recording. I sat on the garage floor with my back against Arthur's workbench and his journal in my lap. The concrete was cool through my scrubs. The oil stain spread in front of me like a dark mirror. Somewhere outside, a mourning dove called from the Palo Verde tree in the side yard, the same tree Arthur planted the year I graduated nursing school. Every good thing deserves a witness, he said, patting the dirt around the roots. I didn't understand what he meant then. I think I'm starting to. I thought about the last time I sat in this garage with Arthur, 2 months before the stroke, a Saturday. He was adjusting the timing on the Mustang and I was handing him wrenches the way I'd been handing him wrenches since I was 8 years old. He looked at me over the engine and said, "You know what I love about this car, kiddo? It doesn't lie. You put good work in, you get good work out. Every bolt, every gasket, honest machine." He wiped his hands on a shop rag and smiled. People could learn something from a Mustang. He taught me to drive in that car. Desert road east of Mesa. Summer I turned 16. The Superstition Mountains burning red in the rearview mirror. "Both hands on the wheel," he said. "Feel the engine. Don't fight it. Listen to it. The car will tell you what it needs." I stalled it 4 times before I found the clutch point. He never raised his voice. Never grabbed the wheel. Just sat there in the passenger seat, patient as a man who had spent 40 years rebuilding an engine 1 gasket at a time and said, "Try again, kiddo. You'll get it." I got it. I remembered something else about that last Saturday in the garage. He'd been quieter than usual, kept looking toward the house like he was expecting someone. At one point he stopped working, stood up straight and said, "Chloe, if anything ever happens to this car, you come to this garage first. Before you call anyone, before you do anything, come here first, promise me." I'd promised. I thought he was being dramatic. Thought it was an old man's worry about a car he loved too much. I didn't understand. Not then. Now I was sitting in the empty garage at 6 in the morning with no sleep and a dead man's journal, and the slow, cold realization that Arthur Ramirez, forensic accountant, the most careful man I have ever known, had anticipated this. He knew someone might sell the car. He knew, and he prepared. Something was wrong. Not wrong like a bad day. Wrong like the feeling I get in the ICU at 3 in the morning when a patient's numbers start drifting before the alarms catch up. That feeling that lives somewhere between your ribs and your spine, the one that says, pay attention, something is about to change, and if you miss it, you can't get it back. That feeling had been whispering to me since I opened the garage door. Now it was screaming. I stood up, looked around the workbench one more time, and that's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper wedged into the gap between the workbench and the wall. Not hidden exactly, placed deliberately. In a spot only someone who knew this garage, who had spent years leaning against this bench, who had reached behind it 100 times to retrieve a dropped socket or a runaway bolt, would ever think to look. I pulled it free, unfolded it, Arthur's handwriting, a phone number with a Scottsdale area code, and below it, in careful block letters, if the car is gone, call this number first. Ask for Harold. Tell him the lavender is blooming. The lavender is blooming. A code phrase. My grandfather, the man who spent 40 years restoring a car and 40 years reading fraudulent balance sheets, had set up a code phrase, hidden behind his own workbench. In a garage that was supposed to hold a birthday surprise for a granddaughter he didn't live to surprise. I folded the paper, put it in my pocket, walked inside, sat at the kitchen table. Arthur's chair was empty at the head, the way it had been empty for 6 months, the way I suspected it would be empty for a long time. But for the first time since we buried him, I didn't feel like I was sitting in an empty house. I felt like I was sitting in the opening move of something Arthur had been building long before I knew the game had started. I looked at the phone number. Whoever Harold was, Arthur trusted him enough to leave his name in a place only I would find. Whatever the lavender is blooming meant, it was important enough to hide behind 40 years of tools and dust and careful, patient work. I picked up my phone. My hands were steady. ICU nurses' hands are always steady, even when the rest of us is shaking apart. I dialed the number. I called Vanessa 7 more times that day. Every call went to voicemail. Her voice, bright and rehearsed, telling me to leave a message and have a blessed day. I didn't leave one. I stood at the kitchen window with the phone in my hand and watched the driveway and the open garage door I couldn't bring myself to close. The oil stain was visible on the concrete from here, dark and wide, holding the shape of something that used to matter to someone. I made coffee I didn't drink. I showered, changed out of my scrubs, and then put them back on because they felt like the only armor I owned. Just before 5, headlights swept across the driveway. A white Audi Q5 pulled in. I noticed the dealer plate frame still on the back. A lease. The kind of car you drive when you want people to think you've already made it but haven't bothered to commit to the payments. Mark parked in the exact spot where the Mustang used to sit. Not off to the side, not near the curb. Dead center on the driveway, right where the garage mouth meets the concrete, as though the car had never been there. As though he was already filling the space it left behind. A small thing, but it landed like a hand across my face. Vanessa got out from the passenger side. She didn't look at the garage. Her eyes went straight to the front door where she knew I'd be standing. Mark came around the car and placed his hand on the small of her back. Not guiding, steering, I've spent 10 years reading body language in the ICU, watching how families touch each other in waiting rooms, learning the difference between a hand that says, I'm here, and a hand that says, you're mine. Mark's hand was the second kind. I met them at the door, didn't speak, stepped aside and let them in. Evening heat still rose from the asphalt. Creosote drifted in from the desert. Vanessa trailed a perfume I didn't recognize as she passed me, something floral and expensive, not the drugstore vanilla she'd worn since high school. Another thing that used to be hers and wasn't anymore. We sat at the kitchen table. Arthur's table, the one he built from reclaimed railroad oak the year I was born. 3 chairs occupied. His chair at the head sat empty. I hadn't moved it since the funeral. Some mornings I'd come home from a shift and catch it in my peripheral vision, and for half a heartbeat expect to see him there, reading glasses on his nose. Diamondback's mug steaming, looking up to say, "Rough night, kiddo?" Vanessa chose the chair closest to the hallway, escape route. I registered it the way I register a patient positioning themselves near the door before I deliver test results. Automatically, without trying. Mark didn't sit. He leaned against the counter and surveyed the kitchen the way a real estate appraiser surveys crown molding. His eyes moved from the window above the sink to the original tile backsplash to the archway into the living room. He was calculating, not admiring, pricing. I could feel it the way you feel a barometric shift before a storm. He was standing in my grandfather's kitchen running numbers in his head about what it was worth. His watch caught the overhead light. New, tastefully expensive, an Omega Seamaster or something near it. And his shoes. Italian leather, barely scuffed, the soles still sharp at the edges. These were not the possessions of a man who needed $28,000 from a 60-year-old car to fund a wedding deposit. These were the possessions of a man spending freely from a source he didn't intend to name. Something cold settled in my stomach and made itself at home. "Where is the car, Vanessa?" I kept my voice level, the same voice I use when telling a family that the next 24 hours are critical and I need them to hear me clearly. No panic, no accusation, just the question. Her hands twisted in her lap. "I can explain." "Where is the car?" "We needed the money for the wedding. Mark's been planning Dubai and the deposits were due and the car was just sitting there collecting dust. I thought Grandpa would have wanted us to use it for something that mattered." "How much?" She glanced at Mark. He gave a slight nod. "Permission." I watched that nod the way I watch a senior physician signal a resident across a patient's bed, small and practiced. It meant my sister needed her fiancé's approval before she could answer a simple question about money. 28,000. I let the number sit. $28,000. 40 years of Arthur's Saturdays. 40 years of sourcing parts from junkyards across 3 states. Hand-mixing paint until the red was exactly the shade of dark wine he saw in his head. Hand-stitching leather with patience most people can't even imagine. Sold for the price of a mid-range sedan. Mark spoke for the first time. "Chloe, I get it. The car was sentimental, but your grandfather's gone. Sentimentality doesn't pay bills. That Mustang was depreciating in your garage while it could have been working for this family's future." This family's future. The way he said it. Possessive. As though the ring on Vanessa's finger granted him equity in everything Arthur spent his life building. As though engagement was a merger, and he'd just acquired a controlling share. "Besides," Mark added, shifting against the counter, "Harold said the engine needed serious work. Transmission was slipping, wasn't worth much more than what we got for it." He stopped, caught himself, but not fast enough. "Harold?" I asked, quietly. The way I ask a patient how much they've really been drinking when the liver panel tells me the truth they won't. Mark's jaw tightened for half a second. Micro-expression. The kind I'm trained to catch at 3 a.m. when someone says they're fine while their vitals say they're dying. "The buyer, some mechanic over on McDowell." But I heard it. Mark said Harold's name before Vanessa did, before anyone mentioned a name. He already knew the buyer, he'd already spoken to the shop. He had researched the sale, identified the target, set the price, and handed the script to Vanessa to perform while I was 12 hours deep in a night shift at Phoenix General. This wasn't my sister's impulsive decision. This was Mark's operation executed through my sister's hands. I filed it away, said nothing. ICU training. When a patient's vitals shift, you don't announce it to the room. You assess, you document, you act when the time is right. I stood up, walked to the counter, picked up Arthur's restoration journal, the one I'd found that morning on the workbench, set it on the table in front of Vanessa, opened it to the last page. "Read it." She read. I watched her eyes move across the page, watched them slow at the final entry, the one Arthur wrote 7 weeks before the stroke. "Chloe's birthday next month. Surprise her. She's ready. 40 years and this old car still teaches me patience. Can't wait to see her face when she turns the key and hears that engine for the first time knowing it's hers. My girl, she'll understand what this car really—" It stopped mid-sentence. The pen trailed off into nothing. 3 weeks later, he collapsed at his desk. I held his hand in the ICU for 11 hours. A tear hit the journal page. Not mine. Vanessa's. It landed on the word patience, smudging ink that was already months old. For a moment, she wasn't the woman who sold the car. She was the little girl who fell asleep in the Mustang's back seat on road trips to Flagstaff, who called Arthur Papa Bear until she was 12, who sat on his lap while he read the Sunday paper and pretended to understand the box scores. That Vanessa was still in there. I could see her. Underneath 2 years of Mark's careful influence, she was still in there. But then Mark moved. We should go. His hand found Vanessa's shoulder, that steering grip. Chloe needs time. We'll talk when everyone's calmer. The wedding planning won't wait, babe. Vanessa stood, eyes wet, still on the journal. Chloe, Go. I didn't walk them to the door. I sat at the table and listened. Footsteps on tile, the front door opening, the Audi starting, the sound of the car backing out of the space where the Mustang used to live. Then nothing. Just the house and the silence and the empty chair and the journal with my sister's tear drying on our grandfather's last unfinished thought. The clock on the wall said 7:14. I'd been awake 31 hours. My body wanted sleep. My mind was running triage. I replayed everything. Mark knowing Harold's name, the watch, the lease Audi, the way he appraised the kitchen like inventory, the way Vanessa needed permission before she could say a number out loud. I sorted the details the way I sort patient data after a complicated admission, looking for the pattern that connects the symptoms to the disease. Then something surfaced, a detail from that morning I'd pushed aside in the shock of the empty garage. The driveway, fresh scratches on the concrete near the garage mouth. Trailer hitch marks. Deep ones. Someone had backed a flatbed into the driveway, loaded a 2,000-pound car, and hauled it out. You don't use a flatbed to deliver a running car to a mechanic 3 miles down McDowell Road. You drive it. The Mustang ran fine. Arthur had it tuned and running 2 months before the stroke. I remember the sound of that engine catching, the deep rumble shaking the garage walls, the wrenches rattling on their shadow boards. Someone brought a trailer, loaded the car while I was gone. And Mark knew my shift schedule. He'd asked about it at dinner 2 weeks ago, casual as small talk. So Chloe works nights, huh? That must be tough. I'd thought he was being polite. He was timing a heist. This was not impulsive. This was orchestrated. And the man who orchestrated it had just stood in my grandfather's kitchen wearing Italian shoes and told me that sentimentality doesn't pay bills. I walked back to the garage, worse at night, just oil stain and shadows and the absence of a car that should have been mine. I pulled the folded paper from my pocket, Arthur's handwriting under the bare bulb, a phone number with a Scottsdale area code, and below it, in careful block letters, the code phrase I still didn't fully understand. Back in the kitchen, I dialed, 4 rings, then voicemail. You've reached Bennett Classic Restorations. Leave a message after the tone. I hung up, tried again. Same, left no message. A lifetime of night shifts taught me that the most important information travels in person, never through a recording. I made coffee, Arthur's Folgers, the red can he bought every 2 weeks for 40 years. The smell filled the kitchen like a visitation. I sat with it at the table and took stock of what I knew and what I didn't. I knew the car was gone. I knew Mark engineered the sale. I knew Arthur anticipated it. I didn't know why my grandfather hid a phone number behind his workbench, why he invented a code phrase, or what Harold Bennett had to do with any of it. But I knew this. Arthur Ramirez spent 40 years as a forensic accountant. He traced embezzled funds through shell companies. He testified in federal court 11 times. He once told me, "Numbers don't lie, sweetheart. People lie. Numbers just sit there and wait for someone smart enough to read them." Arthur didn't panic. Arthur prepared. And whatever he prepared was sitting in a restoration shop on McDowell Road waiting for me. I fell asleep on the couch sometime after midnight. Arthur's journal on my chest, his note in my pocket, the Folgers going cold on the table. At 6:15 the next morning, my phone rang. Unknown Scottsdale number. I answered on the first ring. "Miss Ramirez?" The voice was rough, weathered, the voice of a man who'd spent decades breathing paint thinner and motor oil. "My name is Harold Bennett. I own a restoration shop on McDowell Road. Your grandfather and I were close. I'm holding his car. And I need you to come here right now. Arthur left something inside the Mustang, something he wanted only you to find." I was already reaching for the keys to Arthur's truck. I took Arthur's truck. The F-250 he used to haul parts, bench seat cracked from decades of Arizona sun, the cab still holding his smell. Coffee, Old Spice, and something faintly sweet that was just Arthur. I drove east on McDowell Road through the industrial stretch where auto body shops and welding yards lined both sides. Morning light cut hard across the Sonoran, painting the Superstition Mountains pink and gold. The air through the cracked window tasted of dust and creosote. I passed a strip mall with a storefront I'd never noticed before. A sign in the window read, "New Beginnings Support Group, Wednesdays 7 p.m. Grief counseling." I clocked it without thinking, the way I clock an irregular number on a monitor that isn't alarming yet but doesn't feel right either. Something about that sign pricked the back of my mind. I didn't know why. I kept driving. Bennett Classic Restorations sat between a transmission shop and a concrete supplier. Desert stone building, sandstone block, flat roof, a hand-painted sign. Bennett Classic Restorations since 1989. Above the bay doors, a vintage Texaco star sign, rusted at the edges but still proud. The lot held a dozen cars in various states of resurrection. A Corvette Stingray missing its hood, a Plymouth Barracuda in primer gray, and in the far corner, under a canvas tarp staked against desert wind, a shape I'd have recognized from 100 yards. The long hood, the fast back slope. Even covered, the Mustang looked like it was about to run. I parked, breathed, the same breathing I do before walking into a room where the news is bad. The shop office door opened before I reached it. Harold Bennett, 62. Wiry and sun-darkened. Khaki coveralls with Harold stitched in red above the pocket. Silver buzz cut, marine sharp. Hands scarred from decades of metalwork. Eyes red-rimmed. He hadn't slept either. "Miss Ramirez." Working man's handshake, firm, calloused, honest. "Thank you for coming this early. I wasn't sure you'd get my message." "You said my grandfather left something in the car." "I did." He held the door open and gestured toward the office. "But first, I need you to understand how I knew Arthur, and why he trusted me with this. Please, it's going to take a minute." The office was small, cluttered the way working offices get when the work matters more than the filing. Metal desk buried under invoices. A Mr. Coffee machine older than the building, the pot stained brown from years of service. Framed photographs on every wall, classic cars, before and after restoration shots, a few customer photos. One photo stopped me cold. Corner of the wall, slightly crooked in its frame. Arthur and Harold standing on a riverbank, fishing rods in hand, both laughing with their heads thrown back. Arthur looked 10 years younger. They were wearing matching caps that read, "World's Okayest Fisherman." I stared at it. This wasn't a business relationship. This was friendship. Deep, old, comfortable friendship. The kind built on matching hats and inside jokes and 20 years of Saturday mornings on a river. And I never knew it existed. "How long did you know my grandfather?" 23 years. 23 years. I visited Arthur every single week of my adult life. He never once mentioned Harold Bennett. He kept this friendship entirely separate, this whole corner of his life hidden. The man who told me everything about the Mustang's engine specs and the proper way to season a cast iron pan never said a word about the person he went fishing with for 2 decades. Harold poured coffee without asking, handed me a mug, black, no sugar, exactly how Arthur drank it. He sat down across from me and told me a story. 2001. Harold's wife, Ellen, was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. 7 months from diagnosis to the end. Insurance covered 80%, which sounds generous until you realize that 80% of catastrophic still leaves you underwater. Harold owed $112,000. The bank was circling the shop with a foreclosure notice. His life's work, 30 years of building a reputation one restored engine at a time, about to disappear under a rubber stamp. Arthur was a customer back then, had been bringing the Mustang in for specialty work, chrome plating, paint matching, parts that Harold tracked down from junkyards and swap meets across 3 states. They were friendly. Not close. Not yet. Then Arthur saw the foreclosure notice taped to Harold's front door. "He didn't offer me money," Harold said. His voice thickened the way voices do when the memory is heavier than the words can hold. That's not who Arthur was. He sat right where you're sitting and asked me 3 questions. How much do you owe? Who do you owe it to? And do you have 6 months of financial records? Arthur, forensic accountant, 40 years of reading numbers the way Harold read engines, sat in this office and went through Harold's books, spent 6 months restructuring the debt, negotiated with creditors, found billing errors in the hospital invoices that knocked $19,000 off the total, set up a payment plan Harold could survive on. Your grandfather didn't give me a fish, Chloe. He taught me how to fish. Saved my shop. Saved my life, if I'm being honest about it. Harold paused. His hands found the fishing photo on the shelf behind him, and he held it the way you hold something fragile that proves a thing you need to believe is real. Ellen was gone, and I was ready to follow her out the door. Arthur gave me a reason to keep the lights on. He set the photo down, carefully. After that, we fished together every other Saturday for 20 years, until he got too sick. The last time I saw him healthy, he looked at me across the boat and said, "Harold, I need you to do something for me, and you can't ask why until it's time." I set my coffee down. What did he ask you to do? Build a hidden compartment in the Mustang. The words sat in the air between us. Somewhere in the shop bays, a pneumatic wrench fired off 3 quick bursts. The coffee machine gurgled, normal sounds in a room where normal had just left. We walked across the lot, morning sun full and merciless, Arizona burning off every shadow. Harold stopped beside the tarped car and rested his hand on the canvas. Arthur drove the Mustang here himself 10 months before he died. Spent 3 hours with me. Told me things about your family, about Mark. His jaw tightened. I watched the muscle work beneath the weathered skin. He asked me to build a custom compartment behind the dashboard, deep enough for documents, sealed and invisible unless you know where to press. And he made me swear 2 things. If anyone ever tried to sell this car, I would buy it, no matter the price, and I would call you. Only me? Only you. He was very specific. Harold gripped the edge of the tarp, pulled it back slowly. The Mustang emerged like a held breath finally released. Candy apple red. Arthur's custom mix, deeper than factory, a burgundy undertone that shifted in the sun like dark wine held to light. Chrome bumpers throwing the desert back in clean white lines. Black leather interior through the window, every seam straight. Dashboard polished to a dark mirror. And hanging from the rear view a small linen bag with clumsy hand stitches along the edge. The smell reached me before I identified it. Lavender. It hit my chest like a fist made of memory. Arthur grew lavender in the backyard. Had for decades. Dried it on the kitchen windowsill. Sewed the sachets himself with stitches so crooked they made me laugh every single time. Keeps the leather from cracking, he'd say with a straight face. But I knew the real reason. Lavender was my grandmother Clara's favorite flower. She died when I was 4. Arthur kept the lavender alive for 40 years after, the way he kept the car alive, the way he kept us alive. Quietly, patiently, without being asked. The dried flower that fell from the journal in the garage. That was lavender. Everything Arthur left behind was threaded to the same root. I touched the hood, warm from the sun. I could feel him in the metal, in the paint he mixed, in the engine he rebuilt 1 bolt at a time across 4 decades. The car wasn't a car. It was Arthur's patience made physical. His love letter to everyone he'd ever protected, written in steel and chrome and time. He told me the code phrase, too, Harold said. The lavender is blooming. If you'd called and said that, I would have known Arthur sent you. I didn't say it. I didn't know what it meant. Didn't matter. I recognized your voice. A ghost of a smile. You sound just like him when you're angry. Harold opened the driver's door. Leather and lavender and old car rolled out of the cabin like something that had been waiting. I sat on the edge of the seat with my feet still on the ground. The way you sit beside a hospital bed when you're afraid of what comes next, but you sit down anyway because the person in that bed needs you there. Harold reached across me. His scarred fingers found something beneath the dashboard. A recessed latch invisible unless you knew exactly where to press. A soft click. The panel below the original AM radio swung open on custom hinges that Harold had machined himself. Behind it, a compartment about 8 inches deep and 12 wide, lined with dark felt. Inside, a manila folder 2 inches thick, the tab labeled in Arthur's handwriting. A sealed envelope on heavy cream paper with my name in his careful script. A small wooden box with a brass clasp, and a USB flash drive taped to the inside wall with black electrical tape. Harold stepped back from the car. He came here one last time, 8 days before the stroke, brought all of this, made me seal it up, made me promise. His voice cracked. Harold Bennett, former Marine, 30 years of working with metal and fire, a man whose hands could rebuild a transmission in the dark, stood in his own parking lot with tears cutting lines through the dust on his face. He cried that day, Chloe. Sat right where you're sitting and cried. I'd known your grandfather 23 years. Strong man, proud man, never saw him cry until that afternoon. Harold swallowed, looked at the ground, then looked at me. He said, I can't tell them, Harold. If I tell Chloe, she'll confront him and he'll disappear. If I tell Vanessa, she won't believe me and I'll lose her. So I have to hide it. I have to put the truth inside the car and trust that the car will bring it to her when the time comes. Harold walked away, his boots crunched on the gravel. I'll be in Bay 2, coffee's on, take whatever time you need. A bay door clanged open. Pneumatic tools hissed. The sounds of a working shop filled the air around me while I sat in a 1966 Mustang, with a hidden compartment full of my dead grandfather's secrets, and the lavender swinging on the rear-view mirror like a slow, quiet heartbeat. I reached for the sealed envelope first, heavy in my hand, my name in Arthur's handwriting, the same handwriting that labeled my lunch boxes, that signed my report cards, that wrote "Proud of you, kiddo" on the card the day I passed my nursing boards. I broke the seal, 3 folded pages, a letter dated March 14th, 7 weeks before the stroke that killed him. I read the first line. My dear Chloe, if you're reading this, then the car is gone. Harold kept his promise, and the man your sister is marrying is not who he says he is. His real name is Derek Hale. The name hit me the way a flatline alarm hits at 3 in the morning, the kind that makes your hands move before your brain catches up. Derek Hale. I looked at the manila folder still in the compartment. The tab, in Arthur's precise handwriting, read, Derek Hale / Mark Dalton evidence. My grandfather built a case against my sister's fiancé, in secret, while dying, and he hid it inside a car because he knew someone would try to sell it. He knew Harold would catch it, and he knew the truth would find its way to me. I pulled the folder into my lap. My hands were steady. ICU nurses' hands are always steady. I opened it. The leather was warm from the sun. The lavender sachet turned slowly on the rearview mirror. Through the windshield, Harold's shop lot baked under a sky so blue it looked manufactured. Somewhere in Bay 2, an angle grinder hummed and sparked against metal. I sat in the driver's seat of my grandfather's Mustang with his letter in my hands and read the words that would rearrange everything I thought I knew about my family. My dear Chloe, if you're reading this, then the car is gone. Harold kept his promise, and the man your sister is marrying is not who he says he is. His real name is Derek Hale. Born Reno, Nevada, 1989. He has used at least 3 other names that I know of. Jason Moore, Tyler Bennett, Mark Dalton. There may be more. I stopped, read it again. Derek Hale. The name meant nothing to me, but it meant everything to the man who wrote it. He is a professional predator. He targets women, usually divorced or recently bereaved, through support groups, church events, and dating platforms. He studies them for months before making contact. He learns their routines, their vulnerabilities, their family finances. Then he engineers a chance meeting that feels like fate. My mind snapped to a memory I hadn't examined in months. Vanessa telling me how she met Mark, her face lit up like I hadn't seen it since Arthur's diagnosis. The sweetest thing, Chloe, he was at the same grief counseling group after Papa got sick. He lost his mother, too. What are the odds? I'd thought it was beautiful. Two broken people finding each other through shared loss. I'd smiled. I'd been happy for her. The grief counseling center sign I'd passed on McDowell Road an hour ago burned behind my eyes. That sign wasn't a coincidence. Nothing about Mark was a coincidence. He didn't stumble into my sister's grief group. He researched her, found her there, sat down beside her and performed sorrow like a man who'd rehearsed it in the mirror. My stomach turned. I forced my eyes back to the page. His method is consistent. He marries quickly, usually within 6 to 8 months. He isolates the spouse from family. He identifies the financial assets, property, savings, retirement, inheritance. Then he builds access, joint accounts, co-ownership documents, power of attorney. Once he has legal control, he liquidates everything and disappears. Arthur's handwriting was steady in this section. Precise. No emotion in the pen strokes. He was laying out facts the way he'd laid out forensic audits for 40 years, the way he testified in federal court 11 times in the same gray suit. But I knew my grandfather. I could read the control behind the precision. He was furious, and he was terrified. I became suspicious 11 months ago. Vanessa pulling away. Canceled Sunday dinners, financial changes. I glimpsed credit card statements when she left her purse at the house. New charges that didn't match her salary. Classic isolation tactics. I've seen them before. Then the letter shifted. The handwriting changed. Not shakier exactly, but smaller, more careful. As though what came next cost him something to write. I was swindled once, Chloe. 1987. A business partner named Ray Geller took $80,000 from me through a phony investment scheme. I never told you or Vanessa. I was ashamed. But that experience gave me something valuable. I learned what a con man smells like. The charm that's a little too perfect. The stories that don't quite add up. The way they watch you when they think you're not looking, measuring what you're worth. Mark has that smell. I recognized it the first time I shook his hand. I set the letter down. $80,000. In 1987, that was everything. Arthur never mentioned it, never showed bitterness. Just kept going, kept raising 2 granddaughters, kept restoring the car on Saturday mornings, kept living a modest, patient life while carrying the scar of a betrayal he was too ashamed to name. The man absorbed a catastrophic loss and turned it into radar. The letter continued, the final section. I hired a private investigator, Nina Salazar, former FBI Financial Crimes Division, 22 years. She confirmed everything within 3 weeks. Derek Hale has left a trail across Nevada, Florida, and now Arizona. At least 3 confirmed victims. 2 pending civil suits that went nowhere because he vanished before prosecution. Nina's contact information is in the folder. She is paid through the end of this year. She knows everything. Call her first. I folded the letter, set it on the passenger seat, opened the manila folder. 2 inches thick. Organized with the precision of a man who built cases that convicted embezzlers. 5 tabbed sections. I flipped through them the way I flip through a patient's chart when I'm looking for the thing that explains why the numbers don't make sense. Tab 1. Identity. A Nevada DMV photo. The face was unmistakably Mark. Driver's license under Derek Hale. Birth certificate copy. 2 legal name changes. Hale to Moore in 2016. Moore to Dalton in 2020. A man who changed his name the way other people changed addresses. Tab 2. Victims. Diane Kowalski, Reno, Nevada. Married Jason Moore in 2017. Divorced 2018. Lost $340,000 through fabricated joint investment accounts. Margaret Chen, Tampa, Florida. Married Tyler Bennett in 2019. Lost $285,000. There was a photocopy of a hospital intake form. Margaret Chen. Admitted for intentional overdose. The clinical language was familiar to me, the kind of language I read every week in the ICU. Patient states she has nothing left. I've held the hands of patients like Margaret. I've watched monitors and prayed for the line to keep moving. Now I was looking at a woman who nearly died because of the man my sister was planning to marry in Dubai in 3 weeks. Tab 3. Financial. A spreadsheet in Arthur's handwriting mapping Mark's money trail. Shell LLC's wire transfers. Account closures timed to match each divorce. Margins filled with notes. Assets drained within 3 to 6 months of gaining legal access. Funds routed through intermediary accounts before reaching offshore destination. Tab 4. Current threat. Arthur's handwritten timeline. Mark began discussing financial consolidation with Vanessa in January, suggested co-ownership of the house, mentioned simplifying the trust. These are preparatory moves. If Vanessa signs power of attorney, Mark gains legal access to the house, the savings, everything. Red ink at the bottom. Total exposure, approximately $800,000. Everything Arthur spent a lifetime building. I pulled the USB drive from the compartment, walked across the lot to Harold's office. He looked up from a carburetor he was cleaning, saw my face, and said nothing. Just pushed his laptop across the desk and went back to the carburetor. Some men know when words are wrong for the moment. I plugged in the drive, one file, video, titled, "For Chloe." I pressed play. Arthur appeared on screen. Webcam footage, grainy, slightly blown out from the desk lamp. His home office desk, the one I knew. Oak surface, green banker's lamp, Clara's framed photo. He looked thinner than I remembered. Gaunt, reading glasses. The flannel shirt I gave him 2 Christmases ago. He cleared his throat, looked directly into the camera. "Chloe, if you're watching this, then I didn't make it. And someone sold the car, and Harold did what I asked." His voice was steady. Accountant's voice, but his hands, folded on the desk, trembled slightly. I saw it because I'm trained to see it. "I want you to know I tried to tell Vanessa, 3 months ago. I sat her down and showed her everything. She got angry." His voice broke. He took off his glasses, wiped his eyes. "She said I was paranoid. She said I was jealous of Mark, that I couldn't stand seeing her happy. She said I was losing it, getting old, seeing things that weren't there." He put the glasses back on, steadied himself. "Maybe she's right about the old part, but I'm not wrong about this man. 40 years of reading financial fraud, Chloe. I know what embezzlement looks like at the penny level. I know what asset theft looks like dressed up as love." Arthur leaned closer to the camera. His eyes, the same brown as mine, the same brown as Clara's, filled the frame. "So I did the only thing I could. I gathered the evidence. I hired Nina. I hid it all in the one place I knew would reach you. Because I know you, kiddo. You're the one who paid attention. You're the one who sat in the garage and handed me wrenches and asked questions about torque specifications when you were 12 years old. You're the one who will fight." He paused. The desk lamp hummed. Somewhere in the house behind him, a clock ticked. "And Chloe, save Lucille too. He's already started on her." Lucille, Mrs. Lucille Harmon, 78 years old. The widow next door who baked lemon bars for every block party and owned 4 laundromats her husband Frank built from nothing. Mark was targeting her too, running 2 schemes in parallel. My family and a lonely old woman whose only protection had been Arthur. Arthur's voice hardened. "I found out Mark's been visiting Lucille, offering free financial advice for seniors. He brought a brochure from a company that doesn't exist. He's setting her up the same way. Gain trust, gain access, drain everything. Lucille has no children, no family nearby, no one watching out for her except me." He stopped, looked down at his hands. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter. "I'm running out of time. I can feel it. Something's wrong with me, headaches, dizzy spells. I haven't told anyone. I'm afraid if I go to the doctor, they'll find something that takes me off the board before I finish this." I pressed pause. My chest was so tight I couldn't